In this section, we're going to talk about the demographic transition. This is the demographic transition model. As you can see, we have the four phases that we talked about in the last section: the pre-industrial, the transitional, the industrial, or I call which is stable, and the post-industrial. And you can see here how the middle two increase the population, and the last two, the population growth is 0. And you see the major effects, or the major effects on the population, are the divergence of the crude birth rate and the crude death rate. I say the demographic transition model represents a nation's transition through industrialization. It commonly involves the 4 stages. It is an idealized picture of the population change in a country. And this is, again, the population pyramid. And to review, you can see the cohorts and the age groups. You can see the division of sex from male on the left side, female on the right side, and the different age stages. And so it shows the population distribution of population by age and sex. Age-specific groups are called cohorts. Different stages in the demographic transition show considerably different population pyramids. Okay, stage 1 is a pre-industrial period. You can see the crude death rate. You can see the crude birth rate in red, and you can see the population at the bottom in gray, low and stable. Say the crude birth rate is high. The crude death rate is also high, so they cancel each other out. The rate of increase it fluctuates, but it's basically less than 1%. And so the examples, and this is key, the examples are Britain in the 17th century and the 18th century, before industrialization actually hit, and some remote Amazon tribes. So stage 1 birth rate is high. Stage 1 birth rate is high due to lack of family planning. Infant mortality rate is high, so you need to have more children. Here's key: need for workers in agriculture. This is pre the agricultural revolution in Britain and in other places. Religious beliefs. Children, another key: children as economic assets. You need as many hands as you can get. It took 20 people to grow food for 21 persons. Death rate. Here's another one of the arguments we have about the death rate. The death rate is high due to disease, parasites, worms, poor food, communicable diseases, knocked off a lot of young people, famine, lack of food, Lack of clean water and sanitation which is the biggest key. That's one of um, the revolutions that Northern Europe had because of industrialization and the growth of urban cities. They had to find a way to increase their sanitation. Lack of health care. The medical revolution also started in Northern Europe because of industrialization. War is always a factor, but less of a factor than the first four. And then here we again, limited food supply. Also killed a lot of young people. Not enough food. Lack of education. Stage 1 population change is stable. Due to high birth rate and high death rate, population is stable. Population growth rate is less than 1%. Doubling time is in 100 years. If you look at, here we're going to examine the pre-industrial population pyramid. If you notice, almost 20% of the population in this particular structure is babies under the age of 5 years of age. If we look even further, 60% of your population is under the age of 21. In this particular model, almost 85% of your population is under the age of 30, and much less than 10%, and I would say like much less than 10% of your population is over the age of 50. And when you get into the older ages, the retirement age, as we think of it, it's much less than 3%. And this is the pre-industrial population. So if you look at this structure, and this has been verified all over the world, you could go through pre-industrial population pyramids, and you'll find this structure all over the world, where the majority of your population is under the age of 40. And I would say about 80% of your population is under the age of 40. In most cases, in some extreme cases, 80% of your population is under the age of 30. Rapid fall, age structure of population, rapid fall in each age group due to high death rates. Short life expectancy. That's what this pyramid reflects. Short life expectancy. Very few people live to be in an old age in this pre-industrial structure. So to say that most people live to be old age is simply not true. It's not true. It wasn't true then. It's not true now. Thailand in 1960, and this is well past the Northern European Industrial Revolution. We're talking about almost 200 years. And in pre-industrial Thailand, you can see that concave structure. You can see the vast majority, you can see 70% of their population is under the age of 21. You can see 80% of their population is under the age of 30. And very few people lived, very few people, the very small percentage of the population live to be old age. There's very few of them. You can see this very plainly in the structure. Where the vast majority, you have almost 20% of the population in children, in babies. You can see it. You can see the vast majority of the population in pre-industrial revolution, in pre-industrial societies. I would say 60-70% are under the age of 18. And fewer, some make it to 30, 25, 30, and very few people, I would say only 1 in 10 actually live to be over 50 years old. This is 2012 Angola. You can see it. You can see it again. And we're not talking about 300 years ago. This is something that exists. This is something that was looked at 2 years ago, and you can plainly see that same concave structure. You can see how few people, what small percentage actually live to be an old age. And we're not even talking about 70s, 80s. We're talking about people that are 50 years old. Look what a small percentage of people compared to what's below it actually live to be 50, much less 60, 70, and 80. So people do not regularly live to in a pre-industrial society regularly live to be 70 and 80 years old. There are some you can see. There are some. There's even some that even live to be 90, but there are very few. That's not even 1%. That's not even 0.1% right there. So for folks that say that what we're talking about is not true, this is 250 years after the Industrial Revolution. And you can still see it in a pre-industrial society. And this is Angola. Kenya has a similar shape. Okay, and the stage 2 is the transitional period. This is this used to be called an industrialized country back in the late 19th century and earlier 20th century. Say when the 19th century, the United States or Britain, or early 20th century, they have a similar shape. Nowadays we call these developing countries because industrialization is more advanced and industrialization is quicker than it used to be. But we say the crude birth rate is still high. You see that in Nigeria, you see that in Kenya, you see that in other places like in Africa or in Latin America where the crude birth rate is still high. Okay, the crude death rate is decreasing. The rate of increase are rapidly increasing. You see that in Islamic countries. You see that in Latin American countries. You see that in African countries, and you see that in some Asian countries. Like I said, you see this in late 18th century Britain. You see this in 19th century Kenya. Stage 2 birth rate. Birth rate remains high due to the fertility rate, 4.5. You see that in Nigeria, in Western Africa, the fertility rate is very high. Say people are used to having many children. It takes time for culture to change. Death rate decreases due to improved hygiene, personal hygiene is one of the most important factors in decreasing death rate and decreasing disease. Just washing your hands. Improve sanitation. There's, even now, you have a billion people, 2 or 3 billion people without indoor plumbing and toilets and running water. Improve food production and storage. Storing food that doesn't spoil and doesn't have bacteria and parasites is important. That's, the first world food production and storage is a big reason why we live longer than a lot of the developing world, or even the primitive world, as they say. Improve transportation for food. Moving food from one place to another is important because you don't starve. There's no famine, because food can be transported as far as 4,000 or 5,000 miles. Very important. Population change is rapid because you're still, even though the death rate is lowered because of improved hygiene and sanitation, you still have a high birth rate. One, because you still need workers, and two, because it, like I say, it takes time for it to change, and the gap between the crude birth rate and the crude death rate has widened. So you have an explosive population change. Like I said, population explosion, gap between deaths and births grows wider. This is because of the England's agriculture and industrial revolutions, like we said before. Low death rate is the cause of today's population explosion. Population growth rate is 3%. This 3% is key. The 3% is key because that's how fast your economy has to inflate or grow to keep up with the population increase. So remember that. If you don't remember anything else, that's where your 3% comes from. That's where your 3% growth comes from to sustain a healthy economy. Your doubling time has reduced by 5-fold to 20 years because of the explosive change in population. You can see now the age structure, because of the lower death rate, has changed and smoothed out into what we call a regular triangular figure in the pyramid, because of the lower death rate in young people, especially in their 20s. Like I said, a growing young dependent population. Increasingly youthful age structure. This is the arms bearing years, where you see the most turmoil and the most change politically. Accelerating population growth. You can see this in 1901 Scotland. The reason I use Scotland is because that's where the Industrial Revolution started in the 18th century, in 1780, with the steam engine. And you can see they've gone from the pre-industrial phase. It took them about 100 years. It takes less time now, but they've gone from the pre-industrial pyramid to the regular shape of a developing or transitional structure. You can see how you don't have the concave element like we do in the pre-industrial. It's more regular. You can see how the folks in their 20s and 30s, how they're the population is still alive, even with this structure, people over 60 is still less than 5%, and people over 50 is still less than 10%. Over 40 is still less than 10%. But you can see how the age structure has actually moved up.